Hey everyone, welcome to an ecosystem session with Steve here. It's the 27th of September, 2021. Steve, I think the extent of our introduction was from Bear, who just said, Steve's doing something awesome, please meet. Then we scheduled for last week. I had to cancel. I can't remember how I had to cancel, but that was good because you could get away for a camping trip early. And that also connects to one of my favorite things, which is shifting meetings and times and what happens as a result of space being created or cleared. So thank you so much for playing that game rather than playing the David, you didn't show up or you cancelled late notice and I hate you and I'm never going to talk to you again, which is also a fun game to play. But
I totally agree. It worked out wonderfully. I had a great camping trip. So it's all good. Yeah.
Well, I'm great. I'm glad to have been a part of it. But firstly, great to be here. But I don't know exactly why we're here. But of course, if Bear says do something, I'll do it. So one, do you want to know a little bit more about the ecosystem sessions and how they work and what they're for? And two, I would love to know a little bit about you and what you're up to.
Yeah, that'd be a great place to start.
Sweet. Okay, so the ecosystem session, it's designed as like a long form style conversation with people in the holochain ecosystem. Like there's no objective for where we're going to get to in this space. There's no need for anyone to say anything interesting, exciting, profound, or whatever. It's simply as a marker of people who are contributing at this early stage of the holochain ecosystem. So when the world starts shifting and distributed tech is front of mind and social networks and other communication and web applications start shifting in their use and adoption, and people say, hey, what was this holochain thing? Who was working on it? Where did it all come from? There's this massive sharing and work around the really ace things that people were inspiring people in those early days. So that's the point. It's just creating like a little bit of origin and appreciation of those who were working to build the ecosystem from the start. So
great.
Here we are. And my favorite post ever about this was, I think it was the second one where someone wrote in the YouTube comments, holochain make the most boring videos. And I thought, yes, that person has completely absorbed the intention of an ecosystem session, because it is literally about the conversation that we're having. We're simply being here, enjoying the fact that this kind of technology is getting built out and that there's a chance to realize things that we've been imagining we could build for a number of years. And so simply to be honoring that and you and what you're creating and giving people a little bit of an insight. But there's sorry for people who are looking for something fast paced and exciting. That's the rest of crypto. We're not here to entertain you. So here we are.
Awesome. I like the context. And sorry, I got a phone ringing in the background. It'll shut up.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, good. And do you mind just a brief summary of what brought you to this point in the journey?
What brought me? My long story. I guess without realizing it, my first true experiences with basically agent centricity and shared accountability came early on when I grew up in Melbourne in Australia, and then I moved and lived in the desert in Central Australia for 5 years. And what I learned was like in terms of not technology, but centralized social systems don't really create the best outcomes for desert communities in Australia. Like a rule maker several thousand kilometers away is unlikely to create the right rules by which a desert community could live. And in fact, in a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, almost every circumstance, when I was traveling in remote Australia, I learned more from people there than they learned from me. Yet who's setting the rules for them? Why on earth am I setting rules for people to exist and be in community and work with their land and build their own infrastructure? So I kind of lived that in my 20s, and then spent time in Mexico and spent time in the UK, and found holochain through a guy, Trevor Hilder, who taught me a lot about viable systems as I was trying to understand how organizations work. And I was applying viable systems into an organization where I was sort of running operations. And he was at a giving a currency paper, and his friend of his he was giving the paper with had found the meta currency project and said you should check it out. And then I think, that stage I joined a potluck with like Art and Eric and Matthew and Jared. So early on, really early on 2017, and just started. First I thought, this is crazy, what on earth is this stuff, who are these people? And like everything in life, thank God I stuck around, because a ton of the ideas that I thought were crazy when I first met the guys, I've adopted in my own life. And I'm sure there's a lot more to come. So yeah, and in terms of like my day-to-day, my role is building out the ecosystem, hence the ecosystem sessions. I support people with like solutioning, holochain applications, partnerships and relationships and stuff. Although I'm not, like, don't do it from the traditional crypto perspective. The job is to build the conditions by which an ecosystem can flourish.
Beautiful. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and
all right,
you?
well, yeah, I'll reciprocate. Yeah, so very long career in software, basically working for high-tech companies, going back to high school when I started programming. And throughout that process, had the opportunity to participate in the architecture of several generations of large-scale distributed computing platforms. Now, this work was done, well, early in my career, I was in product development. So I was a technical lead for distributed relational database development with Burroughs Advanced Systems Group, later a VP of engineering for an object-oriented database company, small one. Then I kind of went to work for Fortune 500 companies and had the opportunity to work sort of at multiple levels: corporate IT strategy and enterprise architecture at a large telecommunications company, where we looked across the landscape of what are all the applications that they use to run their business. We found 1,000 different applications in their application inventory, and these were huge. I mean, these are, this was an AT&T spinoff, so it was, a large Bell operating company with massive billing systems and service activation systems. But they had 1,000 of these systems, and they had, for example, customer information distributed across more than 200 of those. So there's sort of massive integration issue. And I worked on then creating a distributed platform that could get them out of their silos and into more of a horizontal architecture. And eventually got involved in methodologies around that, and then became development manager for an application built using that methodology on that platform. And then I went to Sun Microsystems as the development manager for their online support center. This is around the turn of the last century. They were just getting their support organization moved from phone-based sort of call center to web-based. And so we built the web presence for their online support center, and then a lot of knowledge management and other things that came with that. And then I became the chief architect for that, and then kind of moved up into an enterprise architecture role at Sun. And then eventually did, and turns out they also had an inventory of 1,000 applications. I don't know what's magic about that number, but then we launched this massive ERP consolidation effort based on the Oracle e-business suite to try and reduce that inventory of 1,000 by about 600 to get it down to maybe 300-400 apps. So that was a massive 3-year project. I led the solution design center for that project. Then they got bought by Oracle, and so I found myself at Oracle, not a very architecture-friendly environment. But
yeah, true.
Yeah, but did infrastructure architecture there, and also got very involved in how they managed the information from customer systems that they pulled in from a diagnostic standpoint, and led an effort leading to HIPAA certification for Oracle. Managed to escape from that in 2016. It really wasn't a fit for me. And through that whole arc, I'd also been just increasingly aware of the rather catastrophic existential risks that the planet was headed towards. And also, in parallel with that, kind of was working a spiritual practice. And so I reached a point, this actually happened in 2015 when the poet Drew Dillinger was giving a talk at the Institute of Noetic Sciences conference. And he read his poem, Hieroglyphic Stairway. And that poem, I'm going to paraphrase it, I don't have it memorized, but basically it starts, it's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep. I can't sleep because my great, 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 great grandchildren are talking to me in my dreams. And they're asking me, what did you do when the planet was plundered? What did you do when democracy was destroyed? What did you do once you knew? And that phrase just pierced me to my heart. I knew in that instant that I had to do something different.
Mm.
And I didn't know what that looked like. And when I look back and said, well, I don't think, Fortune 500 companies are on the forefront of the evolutionary change that needs to happen. In fact, they're the agents of destruction in many ways, right? Not necessarily through evil intent, but as I, looked at the root causes of where we were headed as a civilization, it came down to very deep systemic causes that, in the systems of our culture, basically, what was needed as a transformation, a cultural transformation, a reframing of how we thought of ourselves and our position and role in the world. And so when I look at that, I said, well, I don't see Fortune 500 companies on the forefront of that. So, I mean, really, what could I do? Like, what's my role in this? And I began to have this vision of, because I've been working on these very large scale platforms for these large companies. And again, I didn't see large companies being on the forefront of this. So what could I do? But what I discovered was there were many, many just brilliant thought leaders out there, change agents, people with new ideas about how we could operate everything. New models of governance, new models for money, and new models for economy, new models for social systems, new models for government. Not instead of top-down power dissemination hierarchies, we could have self-organized, bottom-up organizations, and began to see the interconnectedness of living systems in all of this, and could we pattern things based on living systems, right? And so it was right about that time that I came across the Metacurrency project, and then participated in 2016 in a dev camp, a holochain dev camp with Art and Bear and some others.
Yep.
And I was doing some consulting work at the time for a small startup that was trying to foster empowered women's health. And so I'd become familiar with that industry a little bit.
Mm.
And so the holochain project I came up with that we called Holo Health. And I have a Git repository describing that, the design of that. There wasn't really coding at the time. It was right in the beginning of the transition from the Go to Rust implementation of the holochain. And so rather invest in the Go platform, I just kind of did the design of it. But I really sort of clued into the power of agent-centric architecture. I think there's many novel aspects of holochain, but the cryptographic aspects, they're using cryptographic techniques that aren't particularly novel, and DHTs, they didn't invent DHTs. They're using them in brilliant ways, but not necessarily new. But I think it's the agent-centric architecture of holochain, which is radically different, as you know, from blockchain. It completely inverts the power dynamic and is much more aligned with living systems, as Art eloquently described.
Yep.
So I got really turned on to that, and the possibility of it. It dovetailed nicely with, I'll relate back to an experience I had at US West, the telecommunications company, because although it seems maybe radical agent centricity, as an enterprise architect, as somebody who's been looking at the evolution of very large scale architectures on a multi-organizational level, it's a very natural evolution of
Yep.
some trends all there. So a couple of examples. I mentioned the customer information in more than 200 different applications. Well, that grew up out of an application-centric architecture.
Yep.
That is to say, data was managed in these application silos. And so the architecture that we identified, and this was about 1990 or so, was this what we call the vertical to horizontal transformation, included moving data from these application silos into what we call subject-oriented databases.
Yep.
Right? Instead of having 200 customer databases in 200 applications, have one customer data where the subject was customer, but
Yep.
all of the information you knew about customers in one database.
Yep.
And similarly for orders and locations and services and so forth. Another example of that is with identity, right?
Yep.
So initially each application had its own, you had to have your own profile. Well, that was kind of crazy. Corporations figured out a long time ago the advantages of single sign-on. You get a single identity, you log in once, and then you share that identity across multiple applications, okay? So those were, common strategies that many corporations adopted at that point in time, but they were still organization-centric.
Yep.
Right? So even if we succeeded in getting all 200 databases consolidated into one customer database, right? And even if we succeeded in getting all, multiple identities consolidated into a single identity, as an individual, that was simply my identity at my place of employment.
Yep.
Right. And if I left that job, I lost that identity. And if I had other interactions with other applications outside of the company I worked for, then I would have multiple identities there. And from an organizational standpoint, again, let's say they completely succeeded in getting these 200 customer databases consolidated into one. And yet their customers did business with multiple companies.
Yep.
Right? So the information about the same company could be in US West database, but also in, Target's database and Amazon's database and Oracle's database and so on and so forth, right? So we still had lots of replication of this customer data.
Mm-hmm.
So the natural evolution of that is to say, well, it's the company that about which these attributes are stored in all these databases. They're the ones that know what their data, the correct state of their data, right? So
Yep.
move it to allow the organization to own its own data.
Yep.
Simply reference it, right? And similarly with the personal identity, right? Instead of having my personal profile in Facebook and Google and LinkedIn and Amazon and Etsy and eBay and ... 1,000 times, right?
Yep.
What if I had one identity that I owned?
Yep.
Right? And that could be shared by those.
Yep.
And so I began to see. So I'm wrestling with this. Okay, we need global change, which is a ridiculously, stupidly hard problem.
Yep.
But unfortunately, I couldn't see anything short of that being successful.
Yep.
I see that the issues go so deep and they're so interconnected that trying to just solve a problem in isolation, wasn't going to get us there. So no matter how ridiculous, I felt like the only option was to try and figure out how can we accomplish change at global level, global scale, right? But it necessarily has to be self-organized change. And as I began to think about the architecture of a platform that could support that, I sort of said, well, what if, these platforms that I've been architecting and working on were designed to deliver sustainable competitive advantage to Fortune 500 companies.
Yep.
Right? So we need a completely different kind of platform. But what if we had a platform that was of comparable sophistication and power, right? So these are big platforms that advantage these large corporations, right? But what if we could create a platform for the unplatformed, right? In the same way that currencies, cryptocurrency is the goal. The reality has been something different, but the goal has been to create a currency for the unbanked, right? What if we could create a platform for the unplatformed that was of comparable power
Yep.
platforms that these, multinational corporations enjoy, right? What might such a platform look like? Well, it's necessarily open-ended because it's encountering different, uh, unanticipated things in the world because it's decentralized, it's agent-centric, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the platform I began thinking about, and what came from that is something like the Memetic Activation Platform,
Yep.
rooted in the concept of memes,
Yep.
because and that came from this whole notion that and I'm using meme in the original Richard Dawkins sense
Yep.
of a replicator, a unit of culture, very similar to genes, which can replicate and mutate and select.
Yep.
Memes operate as very, in my view, is very real replicators in the world. There's a whole evolutionary process around memetics
Yep.
that is actually at a much faster pace
Yep.
than genetic evolution. It's how culture evolves, and we've witnessed
Interesting.
culture evolving for thousands of years. So what I saw was all these thought leaders, as I said, that were just offering these really inspiring new models of how we could do things, but they tended to be operating in silos, right?
Yep.
So they're each out there trying to gin up their own website and build their own email subscription list, do their own training classes, their own blog, their own podcast, and so forth. And they'd sort of cast about for if they could find somebody who knew WordPress, then they'd get their website built around that, right?
Yep.
They were lacking a platform.
Yeah.
Right, that allowed them to connect and synergize and amplify their agency. So that's
Yeah.
inspiration for the map is, can we create a platform, again, of comparable sophistication and power to what the Fortune 500 companies are enjoying, but doing it in service to the unplatformed, in service to these evolutionary leaders to foster self-organizing regenerative change. Instead of a
Interesting.
platform for sustained competitive advantage for large corporations, what if we had a platform that supported regenerative cooperative advantage
Yep.
through networks of self-organized agents? So that's basically what the map is about. And I can go into more depth on the architecture and kind of where things stand on that. But
Yeah. Is there anything you can show us while you go into more depth, just so people don't have to hold, if there's anything to support people to not have to hold too much abstraction, that would be great, even if it's just like stuff on a page that you're prepared to share.
Yeah, I'll bring something up. As I say, I'm working on a Git book because let me while I'm bringing this up, I'll just sort of tell you a little bit of the story. So 2016 went to the Holochain hackathon, kind of did the Holo Health architecture, and but I was running out of financial resources, and had some family things come up to where I ended up going back into the corporate world for a cybersecurity company for a few years. So I just came out of that in May, and I'm officially done with the corporate world now. And all in on Holochain and the ecosystem and in realizing this map architecture.
Amazing.
The thoughts and vision that I'd articulated, and I have like a series of YouTube videos from 2016 that described the map vision at that time.
Yeah.
But I realized my thinking had evolved somewhat in the interim. So I'm working on a Git book right now.
Cool.
I should have it out pretty soon. But I'll see if I can just sort of share some highlights. That might give you a visual to work with. So I'll start. Sorry, I wasn't actually.
I didn't warn you about this part.
Yeah, it's fine. I anticipated the possibility, but this is still pretty abstract, but it's basically the core ontology
Yep.
map. And the reason for the abstraction is if you think about large systems that have been developed, they design around a set of concepts, right? So the structure of what kind of data are we going to manage in this application? That's anticipated by the designer. So the world is sort of constrained by the designers of the application. But when we look at an open-ended ecosystem, patterned after living systems, the whole idea is to allow the others to put their own concepts on the platform. Right? So we can't anticipate it. So we needed a way that doesn't constrain the innovation of what can emerge.
Yep.
So that may or may not make sense, but hopefully it'll make a little more sense as we go. So the four main elements of the platform are agents, memes, resources, and services. And so agents, again, inspired by holochain agent-centric architecture, and building on that. So what I understand about holochain, and I'm just reacquainting myself with the latest implementation. So I still have ignorance in this area. I'm happy to be enlightened about things that I misstate or mischaracterizations or whatever. It's all a learning process. I'm just kind of sharing my current understanding. But in that current understanding, when holochain talks about agent-centric, their concept of agent is a computing node.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so nodes have some sort of operating environment, but the data is stored on the node, right? And that's the whole notion of all data is local. And so I can store data in a private chain, or I can store shards of data in a shared chain. But it's the source of truth is local. So unlike a global blockchain where you have a single global database, again, distributed across multiple nodes, but with an eye towards trying to get a single source, a single definition of what truth means.
Yep.
Single chain, if you will. Here, truth is all local, right? So that's the concept of agent. What I'm doing is basically expanding that concept of agent. My definition of agent is simply anything that is capable of sensing and responding to its environment. And so by that definition, a quark, an atom, a molecule, a cell, an organ, an organism, these are all agents, as are organizations, enterprises, economies. The earth itself senses and responds to its environment. So the earth as agent. So it's a very general notion, and it's fractally related. So part of what I've been thinking about is how do you take how do you build on top of the holochain concept of agent as node? How do you take that agent centricity out to those other holarchy of agents, basically? And that's what's going on with agent. So there's agent to agent relationships. There's relationships basically between each of these four things. Memes are central concepts, could be any like governance models. Like if to give you a concrete example, let's say I'm starting a food co-op, right? And trying to source using regenerative architectural practices, regenerative agricultural practices, and trying to grow healthy food and create, an ecosystem where I can make that available. And I've looked at how co-ops have operated in the past and said, that the sometimes the way they make decisions in co-ops, where they try and do it totally egalitarian, totally flat, it ends up, kind of failing. So are there other ways of doing decision making? Are there other governance models, other ways of doing choice making than just pure consensus? And so you run into things like liquid democracy and holacracy and sociocracy and 20 others of people that have pioneered alternate ways of thinking about doing decision making. Well,
Yep.
those are all memes that they could put in the meme pool, right? So
Yep.
there's a gene pool that genetic organisms can draw on. We have a global meme pool, if you will, where if I'm trying to start up my co-op and I'm saying, well, yeah, I'm not crazy about what I know in terms of governance, so there are alternatives out there. So I could go out into the global meme pool and maybe find sociocracy and say, well, that seems to have the elements that I want. It's not a top-down power dissemination hierarchy model, but it is one that allows you to avoid sort of the paralysis of some other decision-making models. I don't really know that much about it. So, but are there other agents out there that offer maybe training classes or ways that can help me get going with sociocracy? Or even, so that
Mm.
would be an example of an agent meme relationship, that maybe some agents, and I'll bring in services here. So maybe there's some other agent that as a service offers a consulting service or a training service that allows you to get started with sociocracy,
Yep.
right? And so basically, agents offer services, and through those services, resources can flow in
Yep.
both directions. So you could
Yep.
define a reciprocal value flow. So it could be as simple as, yeah, I'll sell you 100 hours of consulting for X dollars, right? But there's nothing that limits it to a monetary transaction. There's other kinds of resource flows that don't depend on money, or if it is based on currency, it could be on, let's say, a demiraged cryptocurrency as opposed to a fiat national currency. So those would be examples of when I offer a service, part of the definition of the service would be, here's a memetic signature of that service.
Yep.
These are concepts behind it.
Yep.
And they describe the resource flow. So I'm offering this service, in this kind of flow model, and then by accepting that service, I now have an agreement, and then we can start doing that value exchange and get the reciprocal value flow happening.
Yep.
So that that is maybe a bit of an example. Yeah, the other thing maybe I'll talk a little bit more about.
Yeah.
Again, it's
Okay.
all pretty rough, but anyway, feel free to chime in.
Yeah.
Question.
No, I get you. I get you.
Okay.
Can you go into the first thing, the map, a platform for global transformation?
Sure. Um,
Yeah.
so it's an open-ended, decentralized computing and application service platform, whose audacious goal is to foster the emergence of self-organizing evolutionary transformation. And it's doing that as I thought about how do you accomplish global change. I began to see this happening at 4 levels: personal, because it starts with personal awakening, personal,
Mm.
building awareness about what really the systemic basis for our crises are. It's not just this evil politician or that evil, CEO or what have you. It actually goes much deeper than that, right? And so becoming aware of, at a personal level, what are these sort of unstated assumptions that the whole society is baked on that I haven't maybe thought about, that that I can be awakened to understand, sort of wake up to what's going on, and also wake up to what's happening, what some of these novel ideas that people have. There's fantastic amounts of innovation happening, um, and so become awakened to that. Um, Start to establish a sense of personal sovereignty and responsibility, and start to say, hey, again, what can I do as an individual given my strengths and weaknesses and experiences and shortcoming and so forth? What can I do? But ultimately, then, once I start this sort of process of awakening and find out more about what's available, then I want to connect with others. So that gets into this sort of interpersonal space of connecting in community and perhaps intentional action. But to amplify our agency, we need to then maybe organize into bigger structures, self-organize into larger structures, and ultimately inter-organizational, get these organisms interacting with and cooperating with one another, and then take that to global level. So there's a whole section in this book on sort of that theory of change and how you move from personal to interpersonal to organizational to interorganizational. And the idea of the map is to provide support for each one of those transformations. So how can I help people awaken? How can I help them inform and connect? How can I help them organize? How can I help organizations interact and cooperate without getting into these, without relying on these sort of top-down power dissemination hierarchies that have been dominant in civilization for 5,000
Yep.
Again, realize this is still pretty abstract.
Yep.
I'll show this picture, maybe helps.
Wow. But this is really cool for people to see, because basically you're deeply pragmatic. You've been involved in architecting and building all these solutions for for companies, as you say earlier, that want to sustain a competitive advantage. And then you've built out this, interplay. So interesting, this sort of agent resource interplay, interacting at the memetic level as a way of shifting the way society operates and consciousness, etc., but really at a pragmatic level. So I think it's actually perfect for people to see, because this is maybe not as well thought through and with the same experience level as you, but this is a something that attracts people into the holochain ecosystem, is their sense of the possibility that this might be, these kind of shifts might be possible, but on a really grounded level.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, thank you for framing it in that way. Because when I look at the holochain community, I see lots of enthusiasm and a sense of potential, but also sort of a groping towards how do we pull all this together, right? And so, how can we, so as drawing on my experiences as an enterprise architect, what I'm hoping to be able to do is to help foster this sense of cooperation, foster synergy within the whole chain environment, within that ecosystem, right? So that each people, without constraining people's creativity, because in fact, you want to amplify it, right? Give people whatever wants to emerge through different individuals. You want to give them a space where it can really flourish. But I think you can do that by providing the right platform support for it, so they can really give expression to their ideas and not get caught up in solving the same problems again and again and again.
Yep.
Right? So, yeah. And like you said, I get off on seeing things work, right? So, what I shared sounds very abstract and theoretical, but really in my background, what I've always done is started from that, with a sort of a vision, but work to make it real.
Yep.
Right. Seeing it in action, where the true juice comes for me. So I'm very anxious to put this into practice and make it real.
Sweet. Well, I would love to chart some of that path with you, if you would be up for that.
Absolutely.
Because this is it's really nice to see that combination of the dreamer as well as the pragmatist rolled together. And I think as we chart this, then one of what's going to be awesome for people who are in that dreamer space, but not with the same experience as you, to have a role model or someone who's followed this path with a combination, I think can open up a lot of possibilities for those, for people to bring their dreams into this ecosystem to see what is realized.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's exactly, I'm looking to have those conversations. I realized, and I started to connect with, there's some great stuff happening in the ecosystem. The Atom project, the Nikos,
Yes.
the Holoria project, the neighborhoods projects, um, Junto. There's some really exciting stuff happening, and just starting to have conversations there. But I realized I needed this sort of restatement of this map vision so I could bring something to the conversation a little more concrete, with something people can read and look at and so forth. So right now I'm sort of focused on getting that expressed so I have something to bring to the party. But then, yeah, I fully very interested in engaging these kinds of conversations because I think it's through our cooperation and co-creation that we'll really get stuff cranking here. So I'm looking forward to that.
Exactly. Yeah, amazing. And totally right. Yeah, I was on with the Junto guys last week, and like they were giving a little bit of a preview of Atom and conceptually of perspectivism. Um, and then Eric Karras Baron and I have been doing a lot of things around Where and a little bit around Sin and stuff he's building. And yeah, you just see it, and it feels like, Art had written that sort of Cambrian explosion of creativity article series. And I really, that's the first thing that came to mind when I'm seeing this. It's like, why should I be so excited about Where, and yet I feel like a tiny kid when I'm playing with it. Okay. And it's literally me placing myself and other people placing themselves on a map.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you suddenly, that is me placing myself on a map.
That's
In a
right.
digital sense. That is not my data center down the road. That is not Google. That is not anything. That is me.
Yeah.
And it's suddenly it's just that shift is just so wild. So yeah, but I really think it is an amazing time for creativity in this ecosystem. But yeah, like your journey of taking this concept, and I know there's going to be so many people watching here thinking, hey, that's what I want for the world. I want I want to bring my version of this to life. How on earth do I do it? And yeah, generally they seem to generally there's a bit of a pattern where they enroll other people to say, like, this is the way you must do it, as in getting the social mass around something will like build the solution. And there's something beautiful around, you're always talking about collaboration, etc., because you don't have that same thing. Like you can build stuff.
Yeah,
So
I'm first to tell you, I don't have the answer. I don't
I
think
know.
anyone does,
I know
right?
you don't.
And
It's
so,
great.
what we need to do is, and the way I think about the meme pool, right, is instead of arguing about who's right, oh, I think holacracy is better than sociocracy. It's like, put them both in the meme pool. You don't have to argue. Put yourself in the map, put your ideas in the map, right? And then those that work, people that resonate it, they try it out, it works or it doesn't work, they provide feedback into the platform. Those that work, let the evolutionary process operate, right? So those that work will grow, and those that don't will tend to subside, not because of some, arguments in winning a debate. It's like proven in action. This really fits, or maybe this one fits in this kind of context. This one works better in this other kind of context. So now, as an agent, I can do my own assessment of what is my context and make my own choice about which of those seems to fit better, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sweet. Well, is it? What I'd love, like maybe in a few weeks, or depending on how like the momentum, like to jump on again and just see where you're at, see etc. And then maybe be catching up every 1 to 2 months over the next year or so, just see how things are unfolding. If that would be good for you.
Yeah, it would. It would. Yeah. I hope to be a little bit further along. My mother actually passed away at the end of August, and that had been a long process to get there, and a lot to deal with around that. So it kind of put things on hold for a while. But I'm reemerging, and
Yeah.
hope to have that get book out soon, and that would be a good time to sort of share. I'll have a little bit more coherent and better visuals and more of a story around it.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, that'll be yeah, and yeah. Well, these things can be, they can be anything, can't they? The passing of parents and loved ones, but then there's off like, at least I found when my dad died as well, there was like there's a sadness, and then there was this space as well that opened.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
Yeah,
real,
very.
yep. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything more you want to share today?
No, I think that's plenty for today, and I really want to thank you, David, for the opportunity to connect with this ecosystem. And as I say, I'm excited to see what we can co-create.
Yep.
I think this is, and I'm all in on the holochain ecosystem. So yeah,
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, I look forward to catching up when the Git book's ready. Um, and thank you everyone for watching. Yeah, and let's can't wait to see how things unfold. And yeah, Steve, it's a yeah, just thanks for taking the leap. Thanks for being here, and and as you say, like I think that's the beauty. It certainly was like in my like really like early days, like that didn't matter if I could admit it or not, that whole ego of like wanting to be someone who was known for solving complex problems. But the more I kind of just live, the more I realize, well, they wouldn't be complex problems if one person could solve them. And why would you want to anyway? Why would you? Like the best thing is doing it together. So thanks for bringing that and bringing that reminder to all of us. And yeah, like looking forward to like our little interplay in the doing it together space. So can't
great.
wait.
Yeah, very good, wonderful.
All right,
Thank you for
super.
sharing this. All right.